Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's Sunday, the 8th of March, International Women's Day, and so I thought, what better day to film a video about the Women's Prize for Fiction Longlist, which was announced earlier this week on the 3rd of March. I mean, to be honest, I wanted to film this video on Wednesday, but I was in no fit state on Wednesday to film a video because I didn't sleep well and I was not coherent, less coherent than I'm normally are. So, as you can hear from the last sentence, my coherency level is always a bit, let's say, dubious. But anyway, so I thought at least today is a good day to talk about the Women's Prize for Fiction because it's International Women's Day, so I have a good excuse. And I just want to look at the long list, tell you about the books that I thought are interesting, the ones I read, and also ask you whether they are books that you think I should pick up and review, because I might do individual reviews of some of the books once the shortlist is out. So there are 16 books on the long list, and 6 of them will advance to the shortlist, which will be announced on the 22nd of April. So there's plenty of time still, to read some of the long-listed books, even if I don't think they will make it to the shortlist. What I normally do each year is I try at least to read the whole shortlist and make videos about those books. But for now, just the long list. In a general remark, I think the list is, if you look at it, and I will leave links to all the books down below, and also a link, of course, to the website of the Women's Prize, so you can check out the books for yourself if you want to. There are 2/3 of the list, I would say, unsurprising, the heavy hitters, as I call them. And from those books, famous authors, books that have been promoted and have been talked about, heavy hitters, for want of a better word. From those books, I read 4. And the first of those, and I guess the very least surprising book of all to be nominated for the long list, is, of course, Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo, which came out in the spring of last year. It's about a group of women in London, mostly Black, all kinds of gender identities, and it didn't work for me. I reviewed the book last year. Many people really loved it, but for me, it just didn't work. It didn't come together, and I, at least for me, again, emphasize for me, there was a lot of cliched characters. Summarizing my impression of the book was, well, all that these women, if they're heterosexual women, all that they want in the end, no matter what age, is to have men. So it didn't work for me. The second book that I read from the heavy hitter list was Girl by Edna O'Brien, which came out in the fall of last year, and I loved that book. It's about a young girl, a teenage girl. It's set in Africa, abducted, kidnapped by a group of terrorists, raped, and she escapes. And the story is more about what happened to her after her escape, how difficult it was for her to pick up her life. I thought it was a brilliant book, so I'm happy that it made the list. The third one is Weather by Jenny Offill, which I'm just finished and I quite liked, but didn't think it was as brilliant. It's this Snapchat style that Jenny Offill has, short snippets of stories about a woman. And it's about weather, about climate change. I will talk about the book more in a recent reads or in tops and flops. I don't know yet, but it was good, but I didn't think it was brilliant. And the fourth book I read was The Dutch House by Anne Patchett, and I read that for the BookTube Prize for the octafinals, the first round, so I can't talk about it until the end of the month when the first round has been finalized. There are 6 more books, as you see below on this first list, the heavy hitters list, and I'm not really interested in reading any of them. Of course, Hilary Mantel is on the list. I mean, that was maybe even more expected than A Girl, Woman, Other. I don't get along with Mantel's Cromwell series. That's me. I know the books are brilliant, but I'm not going to read it. But have a look at those other 5 books remaining. Maybe there's one you read and really loved and think I should change my mind and absolutely read it. I'm curious to know. Before we go on to the next list, for me, the maybes that I might be interested in picking up before the shortlist is announced, there are, of course, some surprises, I think, of books that are not on the long list. And I guess the biggest one is Duck's Newbery Report by Lucy Ellmann. I would have bet for sure that it would be on the long list, but then again, I'm very bad in predicting. But that's definitely a surprise for me. A pleasant surprise is that Margaret Atwood's The Testament is not on the long list. I read this book with a group read end of last year, I think, and I thought it was really, really bad. So for me, it didn't deserve a place on the long list, but it did win half of the Booker. So who am I? Janet Winterson's Frankenstein, her new novel inspired by Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, is not on the list either. I pity, maybe it was not even submitted. That's always a problem if you are surprised by that certain books are not on the list because you're not sure whether the book was actually submitted. But again, this book, this book doesn't appeal maybe to everybody, and one of the criteria for the Women's Prize for Fiction is also readability and that it is approachable. And Frankenstein, even though I love the book, is probably not one of those. But Lucy Ellmann's book, Duck's Newbery Report, I think that's really surprised me the most, because also I can't imagine that it wouldn't have been submitted. If I counted correctly, which I know is not always the case, but if I counted correctly, that leaves me with 6 books that I'm thinking about reading. Some of them are maybe, some of them I want to read for sure. The first one is Gin Patrol on the Purple Line by Indian author Deepa Anapara, which came out end of January, beginning of February. Anapara is an Indian author, and it's about this group of children looking for their missing friends in an Indian city, metropolis. I'm interested because it's a debut, and as you know, I'm always interested in discovering new authors, and because it's an Indian author and I don't read that many Indian authors, what sort of makes me doubting whether I want to read it is I'm not that into child protagonists. Children as protagonists is normally just not my thing, but it is a maybe. The next book on the maybe list is Dominicana by Angie Cruz, which came out in the fall of last year. Angie Cruz was born in the Dominican Republic, but lives in New York City now, and the book Dominicana is about a young woman, a girl, almost a teenage girl, born in the Dominican Republic, but then marrying a much older man in order to be able to move to the United States. I have never read Angie Cruz, so the fact that she is now longlisted with this book might be a good opportunity to finally pick up one of her books. I was put off, I have to admit, when I saw the book last fall when it came out by the title, because it seemed such a rip-off of the best-selling book by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, Americana. but that's not Angie Cruz's fault, most likely, and I shouldn't hold that against her. So even though, again, it's a teenage a protagonist, not quite my cup of tea, but the premise sounds interesting nevertheless. So it's a maybe. The next maybe book on the list is another debut. That's one of the reasons that I'm interested, and that is Nightingale Point by Luanne Goldie. Luanne Goldie was born in Glasgow but lives in London, and Nightingale Point is based on real events that mean something to me, because I lived in Amsterdam for a long time, and in 1992 there was a cargo plane crash in a poor neighborhood of Amsterdam where a lot of immigrants live, and the plane crashed into a building and 47 people were killed from that building. I mean, the pilot was killed as well, cargo plane. There were no passengers. Obviously, Nightingale Point is taking these events, transporting them to 1996, so a little bit later, and to London, to a similar neighborhood, Nightingale Point being the name of the area or the buildings. So that makes me for sure interested in the book. The next book on the list is rather read it finally than a maybe, and that is Natalie Hain's novel 1,000 Ships, which came out in May, I think, of last year. And I featured that book in one of my to-be released videos. I remember that clearly, and then I forgot all about it. So get on with it. It's a retelling, the Trojan War from the perspective of women. Last year I read Pat Barker's book, The Silence of the Girl, which is also a retelling of a certain aspect of the Trojan War from the perspective of female. I really love that book, and I'm always interested in retellings. I like retellings if they are done well, and certainly if it's such a well-known story and told from a very different perspective. So the only thing I can say about 1,000 Ships to myself is read it already. There are two more to go, and the first one of those is Jing Jing Li, How We Disappeared, also published last year in May 2019. It's a debut novel, even though Jing Jing Li, born and raised in Singapore, has published short story collections and poetry before. The book is told from, again, a child perspective. Kevin, 10 or 12 years old. Kevin learns from the grandmother on the grandmother's deathbed, something that happened to the grandmother a long time ago in the 1940s. And that part really interests me because it is about the Japanese occupation of Singapore in 1942, and the grandmother is captured and then forced into sex slavery to work in a brothel. So that part really grabs me, interests me, and I just have to get over my hesitation about a child narrator. And the last book on the maybe list is another debut novel, Claire Lombardo, The Most Fun We Ever Had, which also came out last year, I think in the summer. It's a multi-generational tale set in Chicago. You have 4 daughters of a couple married in the 1970s, and then you learn about the family. Family stories are normally not my thing, and also the book was promoted that for readers who love Elizabeth Strout and Jonathan Franzen and Celeste Ng, none of whom I love. So you can see sometimes that doesn't work if you try to tell me how great this book is, because it's like the books of 3 other authors. But if I don't like these authors, it doesn't work for me. Anyway, I'm the most doubtful about this one because the family thing, it's just that it didn't grab me. But maybe you read it and think it's fabulous and I should read it. Anyway, this was my hot take on the women's long list on this International Women's Day. Happy International Women's Day to all of you. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have recommendations of my maybe list or even of the heavy hitters list that you think I should read, let me know. Looking forward to your comments as always, and I'll talk to you soon in the next one.